Welcome, everyone, to the Lead Generation World Podcast. My name is Mike Faree. Thanks for joining me today. We got a great show coming up. We got Chad Williamson from Fluid Education with us. Chad is a good friend of mine and is also helping out sort of come up with some of the mentorship programs, some of the different things that Lead Generation World is going to do to help build diversity within at least the Lead Generation World ecosystem and hopefully the greater lead gen ecosystem as well. So I hope you can stick around and listen to that and just, hear his experiences in the industry. As you know, a lot of the podcasts that I do is really just kind of getting to know the players in the space. So hopefully you enjoy getting to know Chad. I do want you to be aware that Lead Generation World Denver 2021 registration is now open. It's $495. I'm going to put a little my cell phone here. If you want to text me, text 100 and I'll shoot you a code for $100 off. So that'll make it $395. You really can't beat that. It's fully guaranteed. So if something does happen, with this whole pandemic thing, that we'll return it. No questions asked. If you can't make it, we're certainly not going to hold on to your money. So text this number. I'll give you an additional $100 off as long as you just text 100 so I know what you're talking about, and I will get it to you. But without further ado, let's go ahead and bring Chad in and start talking a little shop. Thanks. Hey, everyone. Welcome to the Lead Generation World Podcast. I think it's been a couple weeks since we've done this. We had the virtual conference a couple weeks ago, and I think we got a little burnt out on podcasts and webinars and all that stuff. So we've got a great one today, though. I've got my friend Chad Williams from Fluid Education with us today. Chad, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks so much for having me, Mike. I appreciate it. This is great.
Yeah, man. It's good to it's always good to catch up with you. Funny story. Obviously, we used to be neighbors for a couple years before you moved off to Arizona with all the other smart, Californians. And, but it was kind of a random story how we even met, because Lead Gen in itself is relatively a small community, right? There's not a whole lot of people out there that even know what lead generation is for the most part. But for us to sort of meet and live actually next door to each other was kind of random, right?
Yeah, I thought it was really cool. I think you were doing like mortgage, business development, lead generation, business development, like bringing in other partners, et cetera, which was exactly what I was doing in education. So I think we instantly had those synergies, not to mention we both had the love for poker.
Yeah.
I think you took quite a bit of money from me in some of our old poker games, but
you're being nice. You're being nice. That's the only recognition I'll ever get of taking money, because in reality that doesn't happen.
Yeah, so that was cool. That was really neat to have those synergies.
Yeah, well, but you were at the time you were working at Ashford, right? And or Bridgepoint Education, which is a parent company of Ashford and a couple other schools, right?
Correct. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So let me back you up a step. So I started in education. 2000, I was doing kind of regional account management for a training institute. They did like Microsoft certifications, Cisco certifications, where we'd go out there to companies and help their employees get these high level, $6,000-$10,000 certificates. And then that transitioned into an opportunity at the University of Phoenix. They were building out their business development unit, where they were saying, hey, we're going to go out into the marketplace and partner, meet organizations and say, hey, can we talk to your employees about coming to the University of Phoenix, because it was specifically for working adults. But their model was kind of backwards, because they were still an education institution. So they were coming at it like an advisor, like an enrollment advisor kind of mentality. And it was like, listen, you can't sit down at a table and talk to someone and, try to find out their past college history and all of that. It's really just, can I get enough engagement to get someone to say, I'll give you my information, right? We didn't call it leads, but I'll give you my information so someone can follow up with me later. And when I went to their training, like 2 weeks into the job, I was like that guy you hate to see in a training class, raising my hand going like, I don't think that's going to work. And I'm still friends with the trainer, right? right? That sounds like me, right? The trainer, Seth Dosick, I remember he lives here in Phoenix. We're still friends today. He was really nice, and he said, you know what? Why don't you go out there and try it your way, and then we're going to have this group that falls back up, and you can let us know how it goes. But really, it was like, when you go fall flat on your face, get back in line like everyone else. And so we had this thing called stacked rankings, where there was one position per campus. At that time, there was 170 campuses across the country in this position. And so every month they would rank us and say, how do we rank against each other? And I love that, ultra competitive.
Yeah.
And so in 4 months, I was number one in the country. By month 6, I had rewritten the training for the entire nation. And by month 9, I was running the state of Florida and kind of mentoring the rest of the country. And I did go back out there to the training, and I began actually co-facilitating that training for the rest of the business development team that would come in and learn. And it really became the model that's currently used today for, mostly for-profit universities, for partnering with corporations and organizations to develop enrollment.
Okay,
so that was kind of my foray.
Yeah. I want to stop you right there, because that just doesn't, I want to know how you got to that point, because, coming in and, turning a place sort of upside down to some extent and just boosting sales. Is that an innate thing that you've always had, or is that something that you learned prior to that? So give me just a quick background about, where you grew up. You went to University of Tennessee at Martin. How did you get, from where you were growing up to where you first got your, maybe your first job in for-profit education? I'm kind of curious to how that sort of came about, because it sounds like you and I know you are a hardworking guy that's highly motivated and competitive, and that alone will set you apart from most anybody. But I'm kind of curious to know about your pathway to, your University of Phoenix in 2001.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's funny. I was born in Russellville, Arkansas, small, little city, right now about 30,000 people. Quick factoid: my uncle was the first African American, the only African American mayor of that town, and I was actually his campaign manager that helped him get elected.
How old were you how old were you then when you were doing that?
This was probably like maybe 16 years ago. So like just 30, early 30s.
Okay.
And so my grandfather had 11 children, and he fought in World War II. Came back, and he realized there weren't a lot of opportunities. He worked at a factory, but there weren't a lot of opportunities in the late 40s, early 50s for blacks, especially in the rural South, right? And so he started a janitorial service, and it was called Williamson and Sons Janitorial Service. And it was founded in 1952. And so he had this big, huge VW van. And every day after school, he would come home and grab the boys, of which there were nine out of the 11 kids, right? And he'd grab the boys, stuff them in this Volkswagen van, and then they would go and they would clean these offices and buildings and all of that good stuff. Well, fast forward, by the time I grew up, we had 3 locations, throughout the South, multi-million-dollar businesses, and all of the uncles had branched out and started their own, et cetera. And it was really, really cool because, I had left Arkansas when I was 4, but I'd come home either for, summers or Christmas or sometimes both. And when we did, our family was so well recognized and so respected in the community. And that was such a, anachronistic to the South at that time for African Americans, right? And so I just grew up with this sense of pride of, business ownership and being, leaders in the community, and that was just normal. That's on my father's side, and my grandfather on my mother's side. I'm taking you back. You said you want to go back.
This is perfect. I appreciate, and this is exactly what I was trying to get to the bottom of, because I know your brother as well, and he's cut from the same cloth. You guys are hardworking guy. I mean, entrepreneurship, the spirit is live and well in the Cash, or in the Williamson family, This is what I was getting at. So yeah, no, tell me about, on your grandfather on your mom's side.
Yes. So funny because his grandfather was a slave. And I think we've talked about this before in one of our conversations, that it's so easy for people to go like, oh my gosh, that happened, eons ago. And, my ancestors did something that was horrible. And it's like, I don't know, this isn't ancestor stuff. This is my grandfather's grandfather. I've got
Yeah,
pictures of
there's
him,
only a couple
in my
generations.
home.
Yeah,
A couple generations. So by the time he was born, the family was sharecropping in, rural Arkansas, and his mother was like, literally, like, we're done with this. No matter what we do, the owner of the land finds some excuse not to pay us and prolong, and where we're not seeing any growth. So we're done. At this time, crazy, like the circle of life. Phoenix had like McDonnell Douglas and a couple of the other big, huge government contractors. Defense were just starting to make aircraft carriers, and they were making the hulls here in Phoenix, Arizona. Then they would ship them over to San Diego to put them together there on the water. So at that time, they were like, dude, listen, it's 110 degrees and you're working in this sheet metal. It's not for the faint of heart. We don't care who you are. If you'll work, we've got work for you. So they headed out here to Phoenix, started doing that work, did well for themselves, here, and were able to put money up and save money, went back and bought a small little plot of land for them to work. And, in their even smaller, more rural community, they became kind of that pillar in the community. They had a gas station that they sold gas in this African American community of Benton, Arkansas, which is now a suburb of Little Rock. Right, it's about 25 miles outside. They were the first with the radio. They were the first with the television. And when you're going back and you're talking about the 40s, having the only television set in the neighborhood, if there was anything going on in the community, in the nation, the world at large, everyone would congregate to their home, for the information, for the updates, if you had to make a phone call. So he became that. And so by the time I met him, obviously grandfather, he was a minister in the Church of Christ, and that's all I knew about him. I didn't get the backstory until later. So for most of my life, I grew up thinking all my entrepreneurial spirit came from one side, the Williamson side of my
yeah.
family. And then to hear, like, I had it on both sides. That grandfather just passed in February of this year at the ripe old age of 92, 2 months before his 93rd birthday. And we
Wow.
celebrated, right?
Yeah.
Married to my grandmother, who's still alive. She's 91 for 68 years, And so just really, really neat. And to see even within, all right, I'm talking about how good they had it, but they were still poor, right? But the difference was and I'm talking, back then.
Yeah.
But they still raised on that grandfather's side 6 children, put everyone through college. And so from an early age, I learned, entrepreneurial spirit. I learned, education makes a difference. I learned giving back to the community, being supportive of those around you that may not have the same opportunities as you. And then you run that undercurrent of being raised in a very, very, religious upbringing household, etc. All of that kind of shaped who I was. Fast forward, I'm going to give you now the abbreviated version. My mother got remarried when I was 2 to a gentleman by the name of Bedford Cash, and so that's where you get Cash Williamson, etc. And he raised me, the only father I really knew. And he was a big proponent of effective communication, right? He worked for the government. They recruited him out of college. He was a forest ranger for the United States Forest Service, one of the few at that level in position. So we moved around to forests. We moved to Idaho when I was 5. We moved to San Diego when I was 10. Grew up out there, moved to Alabama at 15, and then moved back to San Diego, later when you met me. But he didn't really have this entrepreneurial spirit, so to speak, right? Government job. They knew, if you work your 30 years, you can retire comfortable, etc. So his kind of power that he gave to myself and my brother, Will, that was being able to speak to anyone about anything, anywhere. And that was at 10. So, if I'm around adults, I better be able to hold my own in that conversation, not just later on when you're grown. And there was no room for error about the diction and how we spoke and how we carried ourselves and presented ourselves forward. So that's really kind of the overall makeup of what made me kind of what you see today. I don't attribute it to my education. University of Tennessee. It was kind of equidistance between my family that was in Alabama and my family that at that time was in Arkansas. And it was really, I realized at that point it was like the cost of entry, right? You needed this
Right.
this piece of paper so that you had access to the jobs and things and could kind of allow yourself to present forward. But that wasn't what was going to allow me to be successful. It was just kind of a requirement, so to speak. And so
Well,
I think
did you
another thing
always,
that
did you always, you know, at what age did you start to sort of think about businesses and selling, you know, and business development? Was it, you know, at a young age, like, you know, teenage years, or was it something like, hey, my first job was doing this and this is what got me, you know, how'd that sort of come about?
so it's funny because I kind of I laughed at the story to my wife. I think a teacher retold it to my wife, but it was um, maybe third or fourth grade, second, third grade. And I remember the teacher said, oh, what do you want to be when you grow up? Right. It's going around the room and everyone's like, hey, I want to be a
Yeah,
fireman.
fireman
I
or
want to
yeah,
be a
yeah.
nurse, right? A police officer, right? And the teacher, and I feel like it's a little Johnny joke, but I'm going to say it anyway. But the teacher goes to me and I said, I want to be rich. And the teacher was really nice, like, oh, absolutely, that's so great, but typically you have a job, a career that you do successfully. What do you want to do that's going to allow you to be successful in life and be rich? And I was like, I hadn't really thought about that. I don't really care as long as I'm rich.
Yeah.
And here's what's funny. um I've had friends that we've just sat around and talked to, and I've made little general statements like, everyone wants to be, wealthy and successful and millionaires and stuff. And the question is, but people don't want to plan how to get there. And I'd have people looking with these blank stares, and I'm like, didn't you always grow up wanting to be rich? And people would be like, no, I mean, I wanted to be comfortable, or I wanted to, do well in a career, but I didn't. And this is like recently, this is like 3 or 4 years ago, Michael. And it hit me for the first time that like everyone doesn't grow up literally saying, I want to be like the richest person in the world. Remember Scrooge McDuck, who
Yeah,
would
yeah.
swim in the gold, right? That's right. I thought everybody wanted that. So I think that
Uh,
drove me. But then later I realized in school, college, I had a knack for sales. I never wanted to be a salesperson, but it didn't feel like selling. If I believed something, I was passionate about it. People would say, oh my God. I remember it came up with like a telephone. I was telling, at that time, right, we had the big, huge phones, and
yeah, yeah.
someone was like, how does the phone work? And I started telling them all about it. They're like, do you sell phones? I was like, no. They're like, well, you should. You're great. And I just realized I had a way of relating to people. So at a certain level, I wanted to get into any business that allowed me to interact and engage with people. And I found that in sales. So my first real job that wasn't babysitting, paper route, or cutting grass, because I never wanted a 9 to 5 punch a clock. My first real job out of school was working at an advertising agency. So I'll take a step back. Right after school, I worked at a call center. I realized selling deer hunting subscriptions, Buckmaster's Deer Hunting Association in Montgomery, Alabama. And
Oh my gosh.
selling deer, and I got Mike, you laugh, I'd be on the phone and I would be talking to people about deer hunting, and like somewhere through the call my Arkansas accent would come back out. And I hadn't been in Arkansas since I was 4 to live, but suddenly I'm talking like this here, and I'm hey fellas, yeah, how was that deer season, and how'd y'all do, and all that good stuff. My father
Yeah.
deer hunted, so I knew enough about it. But and then so I left. I got a job in Fort Lauderdale, chasing my soon to be my fiance at that time. Moved to Fort Lauderdale, and I was like, well, there's nothing here in Montgomery. I might as well go down there and figure out what happens. Got a job at an advertising agency, and it was my first foray into helping businesses create strategy to help them acquire new customers. We worked in hotels, nightclubs, restaurants, and cruise ships. And so That was really like where I learned how to sell inside on the phone, outside as an executive, really going out. And very young, I remember my boss told me I needed to grow my beard because as a 25-year-old kid telling these, older, rich, successful business owners what they were doing wrong and what they needed to do better. I didn't have a lot of credibility. Like, what's this young upstart, telling me, etc. So that's kind of the process of what started. My next job after that was the ExecuTrain selling training, and then University of Phoenix in 2001. So you literally right at the 20-year mark. And then I think the next entrepreneurial leap for me was I was doing very, very well there between, salary and stock and things and growing fast. And they were telling me, I'm the, I've got the mantle, right? You're on the pathway for really great things. Just keep doing what you're doing. And I was like, pathway? I don't understand, right? We measure ourselves. I did 25 million for you guys last year. Help me understand what this pathway thing is. I want it now. I want it today. And I was that brash, like, everybody would try to pull me off and talk to me like, oh my God, it took me 10 years to get where you are. You're doing so good. Take your time, relax. And in hindsight, I do see that now, but I'm glad I didn't have that direction, because what I finally decided was, if I could make 1% of what I was making for this organization for myself, I would be doing significantly better than what they were paying me and patting me on the back and telling me, they were doing me a favor to do. And a great organization, by the way. I love them, what I learned and what they were able to do in the community for the people that make a difference for. But that was kind of for me, 2005. I said, okay, I'm going to start my own company. And I started a business development firm doing marketing, advertising, and sales for small, mid-sized companies, and, off to the races.
So I want to talk about education and the EDU vertical in a minute, but I still want to kind of touch on, the entrepreneurial spirit that you gained from your family and your upbringing. How do you translate that now? You have two boys. I think one is he going to be a freshman in college, or is he a freshman in college now?
Senior this year. Yeah.
A senior in high school?
Yep. Senior in high school this year.
So,
yeah.
And these are two really good boys too. I've watched and they seem to work hard and all that sort of stuff. But what have you sort of told them, based on, your experience with going into a company and all this sort of stuff? Is it the same thing that the Cash dad mentioned with communication, or is it something that you passed from the Williamson side? Like, what do you sort of share with them based on this for as far as entrepreneurship?
Yeah, and it's all of that. And I think the first lesson, I was really I spent a lot of time before I ever had my first child, right, thinking about what I wanted to teach them, and more importantly, how I would teach it to them. And so it was very structured, although, obviously the best laid plans. But I spent a lot of time thinking about how do I start to convey what can be very heavy thoughts. One of my oldest, one of his earliest kind of portrait pictures is him wearing a suit that looks just like mine. I wish I had it in front of me. I'd like hold it up to the camera. I'm going to see if I can find it while I'm talking to you. But it's him wearing a suit, a little low cut hair with a rolled up Wall Street Journal kind of across his chest. Yeah. Right. And so, that was like his first, formal picture as a child. And he was probably 3, maybe. Right. And so it was those little things, making sure he was always well dressed. And he was the first grandchild on my wife's side of the family. My wife has all sisters, so he was also the first boy in that of lineage for that generation. So he was extremely doted on and was around adults a lot. And so that being able to eloquently express himself in an adult manner. I remember people would look at us when we were talking to him, because it was never like, no, don't do that. That's bad. It was like, me getting down on one knee and say, young man, that's unacceptable, don't you? We aren't able, and people were like, you're talking to him like he's a grown man. It's like, well, how else would I expect him to take on these characteristics if it's no,
Right,
and so
right.
little things like that, I think, in the early formation years. And then by the time he was 13, it was being able to say, when he said, hey, I want to be a police officer, or I want to be a fireman, like all kids, right?
Yeah.
We all want to be a police officer, a fireman, or a fire jet pilot, right? They didn't see Top Gun, so maybe that wasn't as big of a deal for them as it was for us.
Yeah.
But having to convey that that's a noble profession that serves the community, but there are other ways to be of service. And as a business owner that employs people, that provides a service that puts money back into people's homes and households and empowers the community through that business ownership and entrepreneurism, that is just as much, or dare I say, an even higher service, only because of the level of impact. Not that it's better than serving at the grassroots level, but because of the impact and the reach that you can provide.
Yeah.
And so these are like 11, 12, 13 conversations. These are conversations I've been having with my 11-year-old now since he was like 7 or 8. And you're just trying to plant seeds and things. So that was kind of that process. I began teaching my son digital marketing, social media marketing, internet marketing at about 14. And at that level, it was more just books, training material, ebooks, all the stuff that was out there, and signing him up and making him go through it and talk to me about it. And I remember one time, I did it organically, right? Because when I got into it in the 2010, 2011, 2012, there weren't trainings or school. And I remember one day at 14, he calls me and he's like, so for your business, Dad, tell me about the business persona that you're structuring for your marketing demographic.
Yeah.
And I hadn't, it was another phrase he used. We were doing that, but I hadn't used that phrase. And I was like, well, what are you talking about? He's like, you don't have a business persona that you're targeting for your advertising? It's like, no, wait. And we start talking through it. And I was like, oh, you mean the demographic? And I'm like, oh, he just told me something, at 14. So he just
awesome.
came to me last night. He has a couple of campaigns he's working on now that he wanted my help on getting turned on.
Now, is this an effort that he's working within your company, or is this something separate that he's sort of doing, like affiliate market? Like what is he doing?
So it's affiliate marketing right now is where it started, but now it's going to kind of start to fall under my company, or a quasi company we put together. His first was straight affiliate. He found someone who was like, those, what do they call those spindles that you put a camera on, like to balance them when you're filming?
It's like a selfie stick kind of thing, right? But
exactly.
But different. More
right,
professional.
Correct. All right.
Yeah.
So he found one of those that, was allowing affiliates, and he wanted to market, and he came to me and he showed me the plan. He had already signed up, and et cetera, et cetera. So I was like, okay. And I gave him a small amount of daily spend that he could use under one of our accounts to manage it. And I knew it was going to be tough, right? There was no differentiation in this device than anything else out there, but it was his thing. I wanted him to learn. And so that was like a year or so ago. And then, he found, our moving company. We moved from into our home a couple of years ago, and he was like, Dad, that'd be great. What if we marketed for this moving company and helped them get some new business? I was like, well, let's see if we can do it. I'll schedule a meeting. I called, set them up. They came and sat down, and he pitched them, and he got their contract to help them generate leads for their moving company. And so this has kind of been self-directed. And now I want to pull it kind of under our umbrella and say, okay, here's our campaigns plus your campaigns. Let me just give you a price of what we would kind of pay a vendor to generate a lead for these areas, so that you can have your space to see what you can generate. So I imagine, it's funny you talk about full circle. My family's company that did the professional cleaning was called Williamson and Sons. And so I was like, oh, okay, maybe I need to go ahead and dust off the Williamson and Sons and let that kind of be an umbrella for he and I, as well as my younger son, when they come into it from the marketing side. So he's just getting started.
That's really great. And I love I love the fact that you're teaching him things that are so applicable to careers today, right? It's not, it's just very timely. And I look at Charlize, my daughter, and she was doing things with Instagram years ago, and just having that kind of that mindset, all these influencers, just different things, and understanding that more in more detail is just so powerful, I think. I'm curious though. So, you talked a little bit about, your upbringing in Arkansas and your parents, and then the fact that your grandmother or great grandmother was a slave and all this sort of stuff. What we were neighbors, and there's been a lot going on in the last forever, frankly, but more so in the last month or so with the George Floyd issue, and just one after another, frankly, that's been happening. And we talked about diversity in lead generation, and the fact of the matter that it's non-existent. I mean, obviously we put on a conference, Lead Generation World, and I think there was maybe 3 Black people at the conference, and broken down from there. And you go to LeadsCon or any other show, and it's just sort of non-existent. And it's not because, and we talked about this, and love to get your thoughts, and certainly don't want to put words in your mouth, but it's certainly not because there aren't any African American Black people out in the industry, right? So, you also mentioned talking a little bit about giving back, and we talked about how can we help this industry become more diverse, and really help individuals, even like your son, that could get into this industry and be mentored and all that sort of stuff. I'm kind of curious just to kind of get your perspective on that, and the industry and the diversity, and how do you sort of apply that to your son as well, now that he's looking at, affiliate marketing and doing something in this space that's lacking a lot of diversity?
Yeah, I mean, as there's a lot to unpack here, but
Yeah, I said a lot there. I tend to
no,
run
and
on
it's
these questions, but yeah,
no,
I
no,
mean,
it's good. It's good, but it's almost like you jump in, and it's like, where do you put the period? Because
yeah,
there's so much leading up to this. This isn't a an affiliate digital media lead generation issue. When we start talking about lack of diversity, at any level, but even more so within the leadership, this permeates American culture, right?
yeah,
And so I think because of that, coming into this space and being in this space directly, right? When I transitioned into, I think I went to my first Leads Con in 2009 or 2010. Okay. And overwhelmed, but I had gone to the Society of Human Resource Managers. That was one of the areas that we used to go to recruit for, and engage with corporate decision makers in the education space. And there was like 15,000 people there, and less than 1% minority. And when you went to the panels there, there were very few, if any, Blacks in those panels, unless it was specifically like talent diversity. So this wasn't like when I came into the affiliate space and saw a lack of diversity. It wasn't like, oh, I was shocked, right? But
right,
now, fast forward, here we are in 2010, and you start to look at when conversations are being had around equality and economic empowerment, and you look at, there are industries that are easier to break into with lower cost and larger upside opportunity. Me trying to go and take someone with zero knowledge or training and say, I'm going to teach you to go and be a software developer where you can make $100,000 a year. That's tough,
yeah,
right? That's not for everyone. Hell, I wouldn't do it. And I'm
right,
a very motivated, driven person myself. And so you start to say, well, what are some of the channels and pathways and opportunities that people can create for themselves with little to no previous experience, without having to have the highest level of education, that if they're willing to work hard and learn and apply themselves, they can carve out a successful career path for themselves. And this is one of those industries, and there aren't a lot. And I'm in the education industry. So when I say this isn't like, oh, I don't know what's out there. I know what's out there.
Yeah.
And there are not a lot of these channels. And so, we're in this beautiful space of being able to not just be inclusive and to say, hey, we want to open our doors, because we've never been exclusive. We've never said minorities don't come. It's just they haven't found us and we haven't done anything to go out there and find them. So when we talk about potentially creating visibility and awareness and finding ways to engage, Blacks and other minorities about and educate them about this pathway and these opportunities and what it can do for them, I think it's huge for what it can do to create newfound economic freedom and opportunity for individuals in a very, very, very short amount of time. And so I was just really, when you kind of reached out to me and said, hey, here's what I'm thinking, et cetera, I wasn't surprised. I know you. I know how you're wired. So, I expected that coming from you. But to see the outpouring of support that, some of your posts have made and some of the people you've reached out to, and that, everyone, and stop me if I'm wrong, has anyone said, oh, I don't have any time for that, I'm not interested, right?
No, they haven't. And if they did, it would be a quick, way to reduce my connections on LinkedIn. But yeah, but so yeah, when I reach out to you, I have to apologize, frankly, for my own ignorance, in that walking, every day I walk out the door in my own bubble, not realizing, and this is the power of empathy, and when people that don't have empathy towards others, or have any motivation to understand what somebody else is going through. It's easy for us to live in our own bubble, and not do that. But I known you for years. I've known the industry for a lot of industry individuals for many years, and still go to the shows and not really recognize the real problem, right? Until recently. And now, looking back at, like I said, lead generation world, and going, man, yeah, you were on stage, you did a great job speaking. In fact, had a ton of people, talk about your session, and we've had other Black African-Americans on stage. But when I called you, it's like, it's not about just more on stage, that's not necessarily it. It's gotta be something more, something broader to really build the pool. And you brought up the idea of, sort of a mentorship program. And, that I was like, that's it. I mean, that's how we continue. That's got to be a way that we can influence more people to come in to the ecosystem. So I want to thank you for that idea. And I'm certainly going to run with it and see what we can do, at least in the lead generation world ecosystem. And hopefully that spreads out with the Leads Council and LeadsCon and other conferences, or other industry influencers that can really make a difference, because it definitely has to change. But, going back to, I'm just kind of curious about your perspective about your son, and what you tell him when it comes to, is it even a conversation in your family about diversity, and how people may or may not see you, like walking into a lead generation world, LeadsCon, you're going to be the only maybe one or two Black African Americans in there. How's that going to make you feel, and how are you going to overcome? I mean, are those conversations you actually talk about?
Yeah, and obviously for us, it starts earlier than that. It's if you go into a store with your buddies, rambunctious teenagers, and you guys decide to steal a pack of gum. Understand this: there can be 12 of you there, but the only person they're going to remember is you, because you're the only person of color in that group. Literally, the other people could walk right by them within, 1 foot of the person who's going to identify later who was there, who did what. But the only face that's going to be emblazoned on their memory is that one African American there. And here's the thing, right? I'm not teaching my son from like, oh, you got to be afraid, you got to be worried. It's, you have to understand the reality of the world in which we live. And every country has its own levels of bias and discrimination and racism, regardless of who the majority is in that country. And so to act like this is just an American problem is insane. But it is a reality. It's the same that when my son started driving a car, that I had to have a conversation of exactly what you do when you're pulled over. You turn the lights on the overhead, you roll down the windows. That way you don't have to reach for a window button or, a knob to open the window when someone comes. The window should already be down and both of your hands are on the steering wheel. And so that, if you spoke to a black father that hasn't had that conversation with his black children, like something is wrong. I'd be shocked, right? That's just, and Mike, this is with us growing up in San Diego. He's grown up in areas that are 1% black. He or less. We live in Scottsdale now. He was born in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. We've always lived in affluent areas, but as we've seen, that means absolutely nothing when the people that you're interacting with are ignorant, biased, racist, whatever that extreme is for them. And so those conversations started there, and then they begin to grow and gravitate towards, because that just becomes the standard of, you have to outperform. You can't be just as good. You have to be significantly better just to receive the same opportunity as someone who may not be as talented, who may not be working as hard, because again, that's the world that we live in. And so instead of complaining or lamenting of what is or what I wish was, I want to understand the landscape that I'm operating in, and then I want to apply myself in a way that's going to give me the highest level of success. And that's kind of what I teach my boys, and what I've continued to share and guide them in. So yes, in this area, it does become increasingly important that when you show up, you have to show up with presence. You can't just be in the room. You need to be the best dressed and the most well spoken, and then you have to be able to deliver. Just having all of that other stuff, right, the fluff, yeah, that gets you to the door. But if you can't deliver and exceed expectations in your delivery, very quickly, not only are you going to lose your opportunity, but there's less likelihood that you paved the way for others to come behind you. Versus when you show up and you deliver at a high level, someone might say, man, he did so well. Let me consider, other people of color, African Americans, or minorities, because surprisingly, I wouldn't have expected the results that I've gotten. And so, that's why this is so important to me. This is so important to me because as a leader in education, I've spent 20 years helping adults that weren't able to go through the traditional education pathway come back to school and finish their degrees, get advanced degrees, and change their lives and the trajectory of their children's lives because of the opportunities education afforded them. And so I understand what it takes to create opportunities for success and growth. And it's education, not a degree. Please don't get me wrong. I'm in the degree business, and I'll be the first one to tell you it's not about a degree. It's about education. It's getting the skills that you need to develop yourself personally and professionally to increase your opportunities and your value, the value that you can put back into the market. And when we grew up, we heard that because there were trade schools and you could go and learn to be an electrician or plumbers. And now all of that's fallen away, and all you hear anymore is go and get a degree. And it's like, listen, the average person graduates making $36,000 a year. That's not the answer. It is on the path to the answer, but the answer is develop yourself. in whatever area you're able to. My son wants to be an engineer. He likes chemical engineering. He likes electrical engineering. So he's kind of deciding that pathway. But even with that, I tell him, you need to understand marketing, advertising, social media, digital media, internet marketing, so that you don't have to be the hands-on engineer. You can be the person who runs an engineering firm if that's the pathway you want to take. When you're going to go get your 4-year education, I also want you to take the 2-year certification for Amazon Web Service and get your cloud computing certification. It's a 2-year cert, but that cert by itself, when you graduate with it, guarantees you almost $105,000 a year. Why would you go and get a 4-year degree that costs you $40,000 to $60,000 to get out and maybe make $40,000 when you can get a 2-year certification remotely online that guarantees you 106? So in my world, I'm telling my son, this isn't either or. You're going to school, but you can also do this in tandem with getting your degree, so that you have all this well-roundedness, that when you step back and decide you're ready to apply these skills for yourself in your own endeavor, or as a part of a newly structured organization that you've got equity in, you have more tools to bring to the table to deliver. And that's where I think we are in our industry. No business can grow without customers, and we are in the customer acquisition business. So whether you're learning how to apply these skills for yourself in your own business endeavors, or apply them for others, it leads to growth and to revenue, and that's bankable. I don't care who you are. No one cares your color if you're bringing revenue into an organization. They want to know if you can deliver. And so what greater equalizer is there beyond sales, right? Beyond revenue generation and customer acquisition.
Yeah, I mean that's a great point. You said a lot there, and yeah, I agree with almost everything you said. I can't think of something I didn't disagree, but you're absolutely right. I mean, it's about bringing value and having control. When you understand how to turn those levers, from a marketing aspect, and you're the one turning those levers, and you create value for yourself when you know how to do those things. 100%. I do want to take a step back though, and just kind of touch base on the mentorship thing that those that are listening, we're putting together a group of images to really sort of solidify what that looks like, and provide more opportunity for diversity within the Legion ecosystem. So hopefully people can just kind of hang tight and wait for more details on that front. But I do want to talk a little bit about what you're doing now. I mean, you've been in business development for for-profit EDUs for almost 10 years now. Since 2001, I think you said. I'm sorry, 20 years almost. And what are you working on now? Where's the EDU sort of focus for you? Obviously, is it online? Is it the corporate relationships that you were doing before? What exactly is Fluid Education doing these days?
Yeah, so we realized early, probably the last 3 or 4 years, right? The transition was moving from the for-profits, um, for educating adult learners that needed to go back to school in a flexible and convenient manner, to the nonprofit, the traditional universities that were more student-centric. And listen, this is not a knock on the for-profits. I love it. I was so frustrated when the for-profit industry, education industry, came under attack with this idea that they were preying on minorities, and they would say, "Well, look how many minorities that they enroll. Like, they're targeting minorities." It's like, in reality, the individuals that were in government at the time that were a part of this affront, they knew statistically that minorities were the most underrepresented groups in education pathway attainment, right? And so to act like the for-profits were targeting them, when in reality these were the individuals with the greatest need, and then to turn around and say, "Oh, but look at their default rates. People are going to school and not graduating and not finishing, but getting all this debt." Well, they were already doing that. If the person was already self-directed, self-motivated, and had all the stuff it took to graduate, they would have already accomplished their degree already. So we were getting the second chance people into the industry and giving them all the tools and opportunity to create success. And millions, millions of people did that, right? And so, but there was that point of, hey, their first requirement or first responsibility was kind of to their shareholders and to the equity investors and all of that. So when you now have the ability through these traditional universities that have these same great, wonderful programs that are student centric, that are student first, that, the dollars that we bring in are just going to go back into building better experiences, better colleges, and better everything for a student, it was much easier for me to kind of shift my focus into assisting those organizations with the skills and systems and processes that I'd put in place that were so successful for-profit universities. When I was at Ashford University, and built out two divisions there, their corporate development and their national accounts divisions. Ashford University started, no one had ever heard the name because the name didn't exist. They chose the name. They picked the name out of a few different names to pick after they bought a small school in Iowa. So this idea that small universities can't compete, I knew was a fallacy, because if a university that didn't exist before was purchased and a new name is created and they can go from 500 students to 80,000 students in 4 years, $1 billion+ in revenue, anyone can. Okay. And so being able to help small universities accomplish that kind of has become my mission. And so we partnered with several traditional brick and mortar universities. One of our partners has just celebrated their this year, their bicentennial, 200 years as a university. And we're helping them to build their brands. We're helping them to develop programs. We're helping them to create their outreach strategy. We're helping them to recruit students. And it's nice because we now get to walk in and say, here's what it's going to take for us to bring our services to the table. You have to accept training for college credit recognition. You have to be competitively priced. You have to offer discounts, not just to active duty service members that almost every university does, but you have to give those same discounts to the veterans and to their spouses and to their dependents. This idea that the only active duty service members matter, but the minute that you retire from service, like, oh, who cares that you serve? It's like, are you like, no, like, we've got to be putting our best foot forward for those individuals and for their family. And so when we kind of come in with our laundry list, if you want to work with us, here's where you need to be. And everyone's like, yes, resounding yes. To hear university saying, we've been trying to get this approved and get this done. And there's pushback within the university, et cetera, et cetera. And we appreciate you helping us create a pathway that makes it easier for us to kind of push these models through. And so we're super excited because, we want to help all adult learners accomplish their educational pathways, but we want to meet learners where they are. I would rather tell you, don't come to my university as a first-year student, no college credits. Let me show you a couple of great certifications that you can take: a cybersecurity certification, an Amazon Web Services Foundation certification that might be worth 30 college credits for $6,000. But you know what? When you get that cert, you are now eligible to go and get a $60,000 job, a $70,000 job. And those credits, when they pour into the university, are worth $10, $11, $12, $15,000 worth of college credit. Isn't that a much more efficient pathway than just being a first-year student with $14,000 worth of debt that if you stopped right now, you have zero increase in your overall earnings capacity or success? And so creating these pathways and getting them out into the marketplace to show people how they work, partnering with the Coursera's and the edX's and these, mission critical institutes, organizations have great training that need someone to bolster their enrollment and create pipelines and pathway feeders for people to create success. And this isn't minority focus. It's underrepresented focus. It's people who aren't out there maximizing their earning capacity. It's people who know that education is important but didn't know where to start or didn't know if they could afford it. There was a study.
Listen, I mean, at the end of the day, it's not about, it's for everybody, because I mean, if I look back at my own and I look at my daughter who's going to be going to college in another year, and your son as well, they're like, well, okay, well, I'm going to go to university and this is just what you do. And I'm not sure what I'm going to do after yet, but, and then you're like, well, shoot, that's $100,000 bill there, for not knowing what the heck, you're going to do or what you want to, whatever it is. Right. And knowing that back then, I mean, would I have done things differently too? Would I have gotten a certificate? Could I have gotten to where I needed to be quicker and less less costly? And I think it's a knowledge is power thing, right? People just don't
Right.
know that there are these options, or there are these pathways that you can take that are going to be just as effective, and not potentially more effective when you look at the cost comparisons and all that sort of stuff. So I think it's it's just really interesting that to me it doesn't sound like it's just a underserved market. It's an everyone market when traditional universities are so expensive these days, and the return
Yeah.
that you get from them is potentially waning.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. And is this kind of this thought has been created around certification or degree, and it shouldn't be an or, it should be an and, where lifelong learning, constantly developing yourself. And I don't care if you get your cert today and don't come back to school for 10 years to finish, but you know what, if you get a certification in cybersecurity and you're working and you're making 80 grand, you're doing well, when it's time to move up and to lead and to manage, being a great proficient cybersecurity specialist doesn't give you the skills that you need to manage people, to manage P&Ls, to lead an organization. And I'm not saying you have to have a degree, but those are some of the things that you will learn through the pathway of attaining a degree. So it is that mixing and melding. And I'll add this one thing, Mike, because this was really important for me, right? And I used to teach my team this, because it was so easy to just get caught up in your numbers and trying to recruit students. And it's like, understand this. There's the Department of Labor had put a number of these studies out, and it basically said that an individual that has the parent in the household with the highest level of education is how they measure this, right?
Yeah.
So it doesn't have to be both, but just one. A individual who the highest level of education in their household, the parent is high school or not finishing high school, was like 30% likely to go to college and like 10% likely to complete. A child that grows up in a household that at least one of the parents has attained a bachelor's degree was like 80% likely to go to college and 67% likely to complete their degree. And so when we know that over a lifetime, the average increased earnings capacity is about $1 to $1.4 million, when I came into this industry, it was like I felt like I was passing out Willy Wonka golden tickets, because this wasn't just, oh man, you can go and make more money and get that job. I really believe that by impacting an individual and helping that individual grow and increase their earnings capacity and opportunities was great, but I was changing the trajectory of their lineage for generations to come. The idea that your kids were 80% more likely to go to college and 67% more likely to graduate because of the degree that I helped you to attain, like when you start thinking about this from an exponentially, right? And you're changing a person's life, you're changing their household's life, you're changing a community, you're changing the world over time through this one pathway. And so this is so important for people to find the options and the opportunities, and coming from an underrepresented minority-based group, if we need to gravitate to every opportunity that's going to help us succeed. So long story, that's what we're doing.
Yeah, I
These two
love it, man.
universities,
Yeah.
10-year contracts, I'm almost unheard of, for a new organization coming in with this level of impact. And our phones are ringing off the hook by other universities that are interested in partnering with us at this same scale. And we're just so excited about the impact we're beginning to create in the marketplace.
Yeah. Well, I mean, listen, your energy and passion for this is contagious. And I mean, it almost gets me excited to do something in EDU, which is crazy. So
let's go.
Yeah. So no, I want to leave it on that note, because we could probably talk for another hour here about education and how it's changed and the ups and downs, and and obviously this is Legion World Podcast, and so people sort of forget that business development, corporate development, it's Legion. Legion doesn't always have to be a form fill, right?
Right.
And so that's why certainly wanted to talk to you about this, and you've been in this business for a long time, and let's plan to do it again and talk maybe a little bit about the EDU industry as a whole and sort of the trends and where it's going, because I think there is probably some argument that it's starting to kind of come back, and especially now with the economic downturn, there's a lot of people unemployed. That is usually counter cyclical with
Cyclical.
EDU,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
And I'd love to sort of just kind of talk about it some more. So we should definitely plan a number 2 podcast and talk about it some more. And maybe even then we'll have some more details around the mentorship program and what we're doing together to really try to improve this industry as a whole.
Well, and I appreciate that. This has been great, and I just want to say I love the genuineness of your outreach around wanting to see a difference in our industry. Right? We change the things that we can. And you said yourself, I can't change the whole industry, but I am now at the leadership helm of Lead Generation World, and I'm choosing to make a difference where I can. And that was huge. And then, and the other thing that I loved, Mike, was you said, listen, I appreciate the ideas and all that good stuff, but I'm letting you know, I'm not just talking. I'm going to run with this. I'm going to figure it out. So if you say that you want to help, be serious, because I'm doing this. Because everyone's,
Yeah.
I don't care who you talk to. Everyone's like, what will she do? And the idea is by putting a cool caption on your LinkedIn or on your website, like you've done something, or writing a check. And all of that's a great start. But to see you literally from thought, sharing the thought, and all of the actionable steps that you've already begun to take and the outreach you've made is extremely exciting, empowering, and motivating for me to see. So I just want to say thank you and kudos to you for the visibility, for the authenticity, and for the work that you're embarking on.
Well, we're going to do it together. So I appreciate your help too, man. So
I'm all in.
Yeah, man. All right, Chad. Well, thanks for joining me today, and let's schedule the next one soon.
That sounds great. Thanks and take care.